The travel sector continues to bounce back as COVID-19 restrictions across the globe ease. The latest economic impact report of the World Travel and Tourism Council shows that the sector contributed nearly $70 billion to the Philippines' gross domestic product, or GDP, in 2022. That's about 17% of the total economy. But this year, the sector's contribution to the economy is expected to leap to $80 billion. I got to speak to WTTC President and CEO Julia Simpson, and she outlined the factors that led to these results.
Actually, travel and tourism has responded post the pandemic very strongly, and particularly in Southeast Asia and the Philippines. And we represent the voice of the private sector across travel and tourism. We've got about 200 of the top companies, and they are all telling me privately that things are going very, very well. So we've got the top line numbers, but also, if you like, the anecdotal evidence from the people that we talk to. Going back to the numbers, we've just closed out 2022. And if we look at the Philippines, at the end of 2022, it was worth nearly $70 billion contribution to GDP. Now, that was still 21% behind the 2019 peak, because Southeast Asia has tended to open after the pandemic slightly after everybody else. This year, that's going to leap again. And we're expecting the contribution to the Philippine economy from travel and tourism to get to $80 billion this year. And that's going to represent about 19% of your GDP. Again, still a little bit behind 2019 numbers. And then we've done a little bit of forecasting, looking to the future, next 10 years, what is the prize out there? And in the next 10 years, we could be looking at travel and tourism representing 20% of the economy, going up to about $147 billion. So this is evidence of a massive pent-up demand, and people, despite inflationary pressures globally, deciding to travel.
This is good news. We are happy to hear this. Considering, the numbers may not be quite where they were 2019, side-to-side comparison, but certainly considering where we were, this is fantastic news. I don't know if we can put that into comparing it to how many jobs this particular sector can generate. I mean, we need to be clear about the fact that when tourism, kicks up, it brings with it jobs. It generates funding for the protection of certain areas. It generates all kinds of a great chain reaction of events that leads to, a prosperous, how would you call it? Prosperity for all.
It is prosperity for all. I mean, the tourists get to travel and have a fantastic time, but the benefits it brings in jobs. I'll give you an example. At the end of last year, there were 7.8 million people in the Philippines employed through travel and tourism. That's 1 in 6 of all workers. This year, that's going to leap again as travel and tourism comes back in the region to 8.6 million. And if we did that 10-year forecast, we could be getting easily up to over 10 million jobs in the Philippines. So it's really critical, because these jobs, what I always say is the great thing about travel and tourism, you've got very, very high executive type jobs in marketing, in finance, in social media, the sort of jobs that you expect at the top of companies. But it also employs people who maybe have not had the advantage to have a college degree. And it brings in a lot of people, what we call direct entry employment. And that's what governments really, really value, is it takes people sometimes even out of poverty, and it puts food on people's tables.
How many international visitors are visiting the Philippines? Do you have that kind of data, and where? Yeah,
what we do is we look at international tourism spend. So in 2022, the international tourists spent about 4.5 billion. This year, we expect it to go up to over 6 billion. Now, that's slightly lagging behind the global number. And the main reason for that is China's later reopening. We know China, one of the main visitor sources to the Philippines, they opened at the beginning of this year, but there was a slight lag. People had to renew their passports, they had to get their visas, etc. But now the Chinese are back traveling again, which is incredible. Interestingly, also, the Philippines compared to Southeast Asia, in Southeast Asia, it represents about travel and tourism, about 11% of the economy. As I said, in the Philippines, it's more like 19. It will be getting up to 20%. So, for the Philippines, travel and tourism as part of the region, it is very significant.
Listen, let's jump back to the idea of more sustainable tourism. And I know at the WTTC, climate change is obviously front and center. In fact, you have what you're calling the net zero roadmap for travel and tourism. Let's talk a little bit about that as we close the discussion.
Yeah, well, sustainability is absolutely critical. And we published for the first time this year, at the end of last year, some sustainability numbers to look at what is our actual carbon footprint globally. No one had ever counted it before. So globally, travel and tourism contributes 8.1% to greenhouse gas emissions. And of that, the biggest contributors is energy, the energy we use to fire up our air conditioning or heat our swimming pools. Not that we need any heating of swimming pools at the minute because it's quite hot. Right. And also long-haul air travel. Now, long-haul air travel, came from the airline sector, and even in the 70s, the airline sector was looking at solutions to alternatives to jet fuel. We now have one called sustainable aviation fuel. It helps take out a whole part of the carbon cycle, and we're encouraging governments and the Philippine governments to do a feasibility study on producing SAF, as we call it, shorthand for sustainable aviation fuel, in the Philippines, or to be able to access it. There are a lot of alternatives being looked at, such as hydrogen, electricity, but in the near term, SAF is the nearest solution if we're going to get to that net zero roadmap. So those are the sort of things that, as the voice of the sector, we are trying to encourage and support our members, but also encourage government to explore these possibilities.
What can we be doing as travelers to be a little more responsible when it comes to minimizing our carbon footprint when we do take in inducement travel?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's other things like single-use plastics. We're encouraging all hotels not to use single-use plastics, but if you do see a single-use plastic, please challenge it, and be that sort of a champion that is willing to say that. I certainly did once in a hotel in Southern Europe, and they received it very, very well. The other thing that you can do, there are some really, really good offsetting schemes now for travel that people that wish to offset, and also I think it's being aware of the communities you're in as well, being respectful, things like food waste, when we go to those big buffets, just think carefully where that food's come from, and maybe get enough on your plate that you're going to eat and not leave a lot of it. So it's just a kind of mindfulness that you go to adopt.
All right. Well, always great to talk to you. Great numbers, great tips, great figures. We're looking forward to a much happier future when it comes to travel and tourism. Always a pleasure to talk to you. That was WTTC President and CEO, Julia Simpson.